In half an hour, I can put together a strike team of 20 soldiers capable of succeeding at any mission under any circumstances anywhere in the galaxy. That quote opens up the West End Games sourcebook, Rules of Engagement, which details the special forces of the Rebel Alliance. We'll be talking about all of that and more in today's video. Today's content, however, is sponsored by my friends over at Vite Ramen. And I know what you guys are saying. Ek, you do Vite Ramen sponsorships pretty much exclusively now, and yeah, that's true. I'm in a very lucky position where I can work closely with Vite Ramen and not do sponsorships like established titles. I didn't get caught up in that one because I don't have to do it. I just do sponsorships for companies I like, and Vite Ramen is right at the top. For those who don't know, Vite Ramen is a small American business which makes incredible ramen. Are you trying to cut down on fast food? Maybe eat a little healthier? Vite Ramen is an excellent option. It has far less sodium than most ramen. It has a ton of bioavailable nutrients. It's a great choice over fast food, and it's delicious. I love the company so much that I actually partnered with them to make my own ramen flavor, Masaman curry. By the way, if you have some of them, try mixing a little bit of peanut butter in when you're mixing the flavor. It's incredible. Anyway, you can also feel good about ordering from Vite Ramen. They support creators like myself and also their own employees. They pay a living wage. Right now, you can try Vite Ramen with 10% off by following the link down in the description and using code Eckhart. You'll also get a little gift as well. Alright, so Rebel Alliance Special Forces. One thing that's always been clear with the Rebels is that despite having far less resources, like maybe 2 orders of magnitude less than the Empire, they're able to wage a war because of the quality of what they do have. A lot of people point to Rebel Alliance starfighters as the best representation of this doctrine, but in today's video, I'm also going to point out how Special Forces really meets this criteria as well. The idea of Rebel Alliance Special Forces was first expanded on in the Rebel Alliance West End Games sourcebook. In that book, they're described as probably the finest ground troopers in the entire galaxy. Special Forces are responsible for a very wide variety of missions, protecting valuable targets, taking out valuable Imperial targets, and just generally they are, and I quote, trained to go anywhere, use any equipment, and succeed at every assignment. Alliance Special Forces are even uniquely trained to ferment uprisings against the Empire, and many are experts in guerrilla warfare. Despite the broad nature of Spec Forces, they were still subclassified into several groups. First of all, we have Marines, which are designed to both protect friendly capital ships and also board enemy ships. They're experts in everything from zero-G combat to fighting with a blaster. One of the most famous Special Forces types was the Pathfinders, and these have even made their way into Star Wars canon. See, for example, the Battle of Scarif. These probably would have been the unit with the highest casualty rate. They were responsible for dropping onto enemy planets, inserting their own specialized equipment as well, and doing whatever necessary to accomplish their objective, often destroying some sort of Imperial installation. These could sort of be subcategorized into other units, including urban guerrillas, which are of course experts at using hit-and-run tactics to thrive in urban environments, and wilderness fighters, which are experts at survival, outdoor combat, and using the terrain to their advantage. You could probably see how many Spec Force deployments would have been made up of different unit types, and this is also true of the Technician, which specialized in repairing, building, and dismantling advanced equipment. Ditto with the Heavy Weapon Specialist. I think you can probably imagine what they did. One of the most interesting Spec Forces type was the Infiltrator. These are the spies of the Spec Forces. I love the description they get in the Rebel Alliance sourcebook. I'm just going to read it outright. Chosen from those in the Alliance with the most reason to hate the Imperials, their weapons are the Vibro Knife and the Garrote. With good reason, they are among the most feared of all the Spec Force troopers. This actually kind of reminded me of Cinta from Andor. I imagine some of these troopers go deep undercover for a very long time just to take out one Imperial or do one very important thing. Anyway, the section in the book ends off by saying that troopers were trained for other specialties, as you could imagine, as needed to accomplish their objectives, whether that was maintaining supply lines, driving, etc. The second source book I mentioned, Rules of Engagement, gives more detail about the individual unit types I just mentioned and also explains how their training prepares them for different situations. For example, when it comes to urban combat specialists, It says they balance their training between stealth and combat with secondary instruction and technical and operational skills. Unsurprisingly, given the fact that it is ultimately an RPG sourcebook, a lot of what it covers is the minutia of Spec Force missions. For example, how do you drink contaminated water? How do you check blind spots when engaging targets in a closed building? What are the different hand signals, etc., etc.? You can check out the sourcebook if you want all of that detail. There's also information about the different type of armor they used. Unsurprisingly, it would vary heavily depending on their needs, the environment they were in, whether they wanted to favor stealth or protection. But I do think that's slightly outside the scope of today's video. If you want more detail about something in particular, let me know and I can go through and collect it for you. There are, however, also some really interesting notes about the organization and even history of special forces in the Rebel Alliance. For example, did you know there's a difference between Spec Forces and Spec Ops? So far, we've mostly been talking about Special Forces. They perform what the book calls planned and specific missions. However, there were also Spec Ops. According to the source book, Spec Op agents worked on murky, undercover missions involving investigation, snooping, desperate light fights, and performing chaotic seat-of-the-pants missions. I don't really understand the difference between the two types of forces, if I'm being honest. Other than that, Spec Ops units seem to honestly be a step down in terms of training and effectiveness, and that Spec Op missions are usually less planned, given less resources, and usually have a lower likelihood of success. Anyway, historically, special forces of some variety have long been a part of the Rebel Alliance, and as the war progresses past the Battle of Yavin, they've only became more important and more heavily used. Alliance special forces benefit from no anti-alien bias, which is of course present in stormtrooper selection in the Empire, and the overall effectiveness of Alliance intelligence when it comes to the vetting process. It wasn't very often that somebody was accepted into spec forces then turned out to be traitor. On the other hand, many people washed out of the initial training and were simply inserted back into regular forces with honestly no real shame. Practically, special forces operate with a lot of operational freedom and are split up into 10 divisions across the galaxy. Several at all times would be attached to Alliance High Command for defensive purposes, while others would be put in specific sectors or essentially given the freedom to go rogue. Spec Force divisions were made up of regiments, which themselves were comprised of companies, and you could follow that all the way down to the squad and even fire team level. Doing the math, a Spec Op division would generally have about 25,000 troopers in it. But guys, that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this material, I highly recommend you check out the source book. It goes into even more detail about some of the things I mentioned and also gives famous examples of Spec Ops units. And if you want more information, I can go even broader. There are more source books that cover this, although I did talk about the primary two. But that's all I've got for today. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.